Thank you everybody for joining us for this first session around maker pedagogy and thinking design. And this is run by the wonderful Mandy, who is from Makers Empire. So thank you very much for presenting for us today. And I will stop presenting.
Lovely. Thank you, Abigail. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining this session. I know life is very hectic after school and you have lots to fit in, so I appreciate you joining the session this afternoon. As Abigail said, this session is about maker-based pedagogies and design thinking. We will be running other Makers Empire sessions where we are introducing how our program works and what it's all about. But in this session, I want to go more into some of the key ideas underpinning the work that we do at Makers Empire and how it fits pedagogically and curriculum-wise into the work of teachers. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Mandy Dimitriadis and I'm the Director of Learning at Makers Empire. I have a background in teaching, mostly primary and special education and museum education. And then I was also part of the Department for Education TEFL team and Australian curriculum team for a while until I met the techie dudes at Makers Empire and have been working with them for 7 years now. So that's me, and there's my details. I'd love to connect with anybody who wants to chat further about design thinking and maker-based pedagogies. So just a little bit of housekeeping, which was on the previous slide anyway. So microphones off when you're not talking. Use the chat function if you have any questions or for discussions, which will be part of the webinar this afternoon. If you want to put your camera on, that's great, but you don't have to. And we are recording this session to be shared with those that couldn't make it and with yourselves. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm meeting with you from Kaurna land and would like to acknowledge the deep connections that Kaurna people have with their land and country, and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. And if you haven't checked out the beautiful work of Corey Tutt and Black Douglas in this book, The First Scientist, that I've got this image from, I really recommend it. Looking at the role that, looking at First Nations people as our first scientists. And really, when I'm talking about maker-based pedagogies and design thinking, I'm talking about things that our Aboriginal nations have done for many, many, many thousands of years, using existing resources to solve problems and improve the way we do things and survive and thrive in sustainable ways. This session, what I'd like to do is really look at in some depth at what we mean by maker pedagogy and design thinking, tuning into making and what maker pedagogy is, the key ideas that underpin maker pedagogy, and then diving into design thinking, what it is, where it fits within the Australian curriculum. And then at the end of the session, I would like to show you what these two ideas, maker-based pedagogies and design thinking, what they look like in Makers Empire. So how can you use Makers Empire to activate these things in your classroom, and what are the resources we have to support these? So to tune into making, I want to just take a brief look through time and look at the history of humans as makers, because at Makers Empire and maker-based pedagogies is all about learning through making. And we know that by making or constructing, our students and ourselves are learning some really important skills and capabilities, things like problem solving, creativity, innovation, spatial reasoning and spatial abilities, and even things like entrepreneurship can be activated and enhanced by including making and constructing in learning. So let's jump back in time because humans have always been makers and used existing resources to solve problems and find better ways of doing things, as I said already. And we can pretty much understand the history of human innovation and economic development by looking at the history of making or manufacturing or construction. So really quickly, I'll tour through time. If we go back to the era prior to the first industrial revolution, people pretty much made the things that they needed for themselves. So somebody might own a small plot of land and grow enough produce, keep enough animals to feed themselves and their families, and sell some of those things to make a living. But if they needed things like fences or tools or utensils, they would pretty much make those things themselves. And there might also be specialist artisans in the local village making things like horseshoes and so on. And then we come to the late 1700s, where we see the harnessing of steam and water power, and the first machines are being made, which led to the first industrial revolution. So we see things like the weaving loom and steam power. And then, of course, people were needed. People owned these machines and required people to operate them. And we saw a movement of people leaving their plots of land and coming to cities to become our first workers and our first factories. Then if we jump forward another 100 years, we see the invention of electricity, or the harnessing of electricity. Our machines are becoming much more efficient and powerful. And we also see people like Henry Ford introducing processes like the assembly line and mass production. So suddenly we're able to produce and manufacture goods in a much more streamlined, efficient way. If we jump forward another 100 years, we have the introduction of the computer, and we're able to automate the way that we produce products. So we've got electronics, we've got robotics, and we're able to control the way that we control machines remotely and through electronics. And then if we jump forward to today, we're in a period of time often referred to as Industry 4.0, or the fourth industrial revolution, where technology plays an increasing role in the way that we manufacture the things that we need around the world, and things are connected and connected globally. We talk about the Internet of Things, where we have inanimate objects that are powered by the internet. So my friend and colleague who owns a Tesla can start his car remotely because it's connected to the internet. We're all using things like our phones connected to the internet in our daily lives. And something like 3D printing is really driving this kind of highly technical, globally connected way of creating things. So we can have somebody designing something in one part of the world, but it's being 3D printed or manufactured in another part of the world, because we're able to share that data and share that whole manufacturing process around the world through technology. So as I said, it was a very, very, very quick tour through time. But where I'm heading with this is that in amongst this very globally connected, highly technological world of manufacturing that we're living in, people are also going back to wanting to make things for themselves. And we hear talk of the maker movement. And really in the last 15 to 20 years, we've seen this phenomenon globally, people wanting to be makers themselves. The term maker movement was first coined back in 2005 by a magazine. And since that time, we've seen people coming together at maker fairs and maker spaces and hackathons and so on, coming together to create, to make, to pull their skills, use technologies and resources in creative ways as makers. What is meant by the term maker movement is it's really an umbrella term for a group of creative independent creators, really. So people who see themselves as inventors and tinkerers and hackers, people that are into the do-it-yourself movement, but also creative designers, inventors, artists and artisans. So people that fit within this umbrella movement, umbrella term of being creative makers. And what is driving the maker movement is a really nice alignment between the things that people are wanting to do and the things that technology is enabling people to do. So the maker movement isn't all about technology, it's traditional ways of making as well, but it's powered by this alignment of desires being enabled by technology. And what I mean by that, so desires, people are wanting to be more self-reliant, to make things for themselves, being much more mindful of the way that we use the world's resources, being more sustainable and self-sufficient with those things. But there's also a desire to make original, unique goods, gifts for family and friends, things for yourself, for your home, and so on. So there's that kind of satisfaction and intrinsic motivation to create things for yourself. And then we have technology enabling us to create these things. So we have much greater access now to tools. 3D printers, for example, are much more affordable and accessible through maker spaces and libraries and things like that. We can get laser cutters and CNC machines, at publicly available places like the Makerspace in Adelaide. And people are also sharing their tools in an open source environment. So you can download 3D modelling software, 3D design models and so on through that open source environment that's really enabling people being able to create digitally. And also those sorts of things are much more affordable and portable. We've all got powerful computers in our pockets with our mobile phones. And we can share the things that we make through social media. So we can, whether it's a meal that we've cooked or a quilt that we've made or some kind of 3D printed masterpiece, we can share those things and get feedback and show other people what we're making and learn from each other through social media. Before I finish up on this bit, people are, through the maker movement, not just talking about making as an activity that they do. Making is actually becoming part of how people see themselves, part of their identity. So some of the things that people who see themselves as makers say is that they connect with others through making. They feel comfortable not knowing the end outcome, that through making they're going to experiment, they're going to make mistakes, they're going to tinker and iterate, and they feel comfortable with that level of uncertainty. People can reflecting and thinking about what they want to make, exploring, customizing and those sorts of things. And with what I was saying before about being self-sufficient, people are seeing the satisfaction of being a creator, not just a consumer. And at Makers Empire, we call this being a maker, not a taker. And this is a poster I'm happy to share with you if you're interested. So globally, we're seeing this maker movement infiltrate all walks of life, but it's also something that education are taking note of as well. And we hear all these sorts of terms bandied about: maker pedagogy, maker movement. I've said those things about 10 times or more already in this session. Maker-based education. We hear a lot of talk about maker spaces, constructionism, problem and project-based learning, and what role does making play in things like STEM and STEAM and those project problem-based learning approaches. So to unpack what we mean by maker-based pedagogies, I want to focus in on this term constructionism. And I'm wondering if you can use your emojis or just nod and shake your head if you've heard that term before, constructionism. Some people yes, some no, but I'm pretty sure that you would have heard of Constructivism before, which largely comes from the work of Piaget, who talks about construction of knowledge. So we learn by building on our previous understandings, making connections, making meaning by building on what we already know and understand and can do. And I love that Piaget says when you teach a child, and I take that to mean tell a child something, you take away forever their chance of discovering it for themselves. So that's constructivism in a really quick nutshell. One of Piaget's students, who you may have heard of, is this guy, Seymour Papert. Unfortunately, he passed away 3 or 4 years ago, but his work still lives with us, and his educational theories really underpin what we do at Makers Empire. So Seymour Papert, as a student of Piaget's, took constructivism a step further to look at the role that making or constructing plays in learning, and plays in that process of making connections and building on what we already know and understand and making meaning. And what he found through his work is that learning is most effective when part of an activity actually involves the learner constructing or making a meaningful product. So he really started to highlight and understand the role that making plays in learning. And I also love that Papert tells us that the role of the teacher is to create the conditions for invention rather than providing ready-made knowledge. Now, what Papert did through his research was many thousands of hours of classroom observations, and he was looking at what was happening in classrooms where making or constructing was being used as an effective learning tool, where it was having a positive impact on student learning outcomes. And he pulled together 8 big ideas, so 8 kind of pedagogical ideas that underpinned what he called maker pedagogy or constructionism. So I'll just run through these briefly now, and I'm really happy to share more information on the work of Papert because I find it really interesting. But here's his 8 big ideas. So the first is learning by doing. So really, as we know, acknowledging that learning is an active endeavour. You don't learn to be a maker by just watching other people make. You have to actually get in there and do the constructing and making yourself. The second idea is about technology, and specifically looking at technology as a building material. So Papert isn't saying throw out the Lego and the pop sticks and those things, but he is saying let's look at what technology can bring as a building material that complements or allows us to do things differently, and in some cases more effectively than traditional building materials. So let's look at it as a subset of building materials. And 3D modelling fits really well with this. So that's an example. 3D modelling or CAD software or Makers Empire is an example of technology being a building material. And just an example of what I mean by that in the broader world, 20 years ago, car manufacturers were required to make the rollover strength of their vehicles 4 times the car's weight. So if a car rolled over in an accident, it would need to hold 4 times its weight while it was on its roof. But more recently, the safety regulations say that a vehicle has to hold 20 times its own weight in a rollover, so on its roof. So that proved to be a challenge for car manufacturers. How would they make something that was strong enough to hold 20 times its own weight on its roof, but still be light enough to have aerodynamics and those sort of things? And the answer to that problem came with 3D design and the ability to use some of the tools in 3D modelling that aren't available in traditional manufacturing techniques. And the answer was something called, let me see if I can get this right, topographic optimization, which allowed very, very complex geometric shapes to be built into the manufacturing of cars to allow this improved rollover strength. So building with technology. The third idea is hard fun. And obviously we want our students to have fun and be engaged and enjoy their making activities, but we also want it to be hard. We want them to be challenged. We want them to be thinking. We want them to be trying new things and persisting when things go wrong. So we talk a lot at Makers Empire about having hard fun. The fourth one is learning to learn, which sounds very TEFL to me, but when we talk about maker-based learning and when I'm doing my work with Makers Empire, I don't just want students to learn how to be good designers, good 3D designers or good makers. I want them to understand themselves as learners and how they learn best through making. So do they learn best through following instructions and then experimenting themselves? Or do they learn best having a go themselves and then honing the skills they need? Do they learn better working things out for themselves or working as a team? So learning to learn. The fifth, taking time, which is always an interesting one for teachers because what time really? But taking time in Papert's big ideas means allowing students time to work through the whole design or making process. So students having time to make a plan, fail at that plan and then rejig or tweak their plan and have another go. So and also almost that project management part of making and that part of the design and tech curriculum. So taking time. Failing well is a really interesting idea that fits perfectly with the growth mindset stuff that we've talked a lot about in recent years in South Australia. So the idea that making and constructing isn't about getting things right the first time. In fact, it's when things don't work out that the really rich learning happens. Why didn't that solve the problem like I thought it would? Why didn't it turn out? What can I go back and try now? And the idea of being comfortable with that so that failing and iterating and having another try being a really important part of the learning and being comfortable with that. And I often say to teachers that 3D printing is a great way to learn to fail well, because when things fail with the 3D printer, they tend to fail pretty spectacularly. Oh, sorry, lost my tongue, spectacularly. And like we end up with spaghetti monsters and so on. So failing well is a really important part of that making and constructing learning. Of course, number 7, teachers as learners, which we all know is important, modelling our learning ourselves as learners alongside students, so not being the font of all knowledge, but showing what we do when we don't know what to do, and introducing new technologies and processes and learning how to use those alongside your students. And then the last idea, learning together, acknowledges that learning is a collaborative social endeavour and involves students learning together in their classrooms, learning with their teachers, learning with their other members of their school communities, and also learning globally together, bringing global connections into the classroom and so on. Oops, what did I do that for? So I was wondering whether anybody would like to turn on their microphone and tell us about the last time your students made something as part of their learning. So it could be in any curriculum area, any activity, but when did your students last make something? Could have been today.
Hi, Catherine here.
Hi, Catherine.
Each day I work in food technology and textiles, so we make things constantly.
So did you make something today?
Yes, I'm working with Year 8s and they're making a mural based on a book called From Sally Morgan. It's an Indigenous book about endangered species.
Oh, excellent. So and what materials are they using for their mural?
Recycled materials, plus also new as well. So upcycling.
Excellent. Thank you, Catherine. That's a great example, and
right.
one of many by the sounds of things. Anybody else?
Feel free to write in the chat if you're a bit shy to unmute yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Abigail, and you let me know if someone has. Yeah, my purpose for doing this was just to start thinking about if making isn't part of what you're doing already, and some curriculum areas absolutely are maker based, like food technologies and design and tech and arts and so on. But I wanted to trigger that thinking about how we might bring more making and more constructing into the learning activities we provide for students. And this isn't for now, but it's a reflection question for later, and for those of you watching this as a recording. Thinking about that activity, that last activity or a recent activity where your students were making something as part of their learning. And when you look at that activity against these 8 big ideas of maker-based pedagogies, which of these ideas was most evident? So with the mural that Catherine just shared, were the student, obviously the students were learning by doing. Were they taking time and planning their processes? Were they persisting and failing well? And then with that idea, with that activity, how could you tweak that activity a little bit to strengthen one of the other 8 big ideas? So how might you use technology as a building material in that making, or how might you as a teacher learn alongside your students? So I'm posting that as a reflection activity as a follow-up to this webinar. And then, oh, that's a bit blurry, isn't it? But I also wanted to make the links that when I'm talking about Seymour Papert's 8 big ideas of maker pedagogy and constructionism, I can't help but see the really strong links to TEFL. So we've got here learning how to learn, students working collaboratively together, developing those deep skillful actions and so on. So I just wanted to make this point that maker-based pedagogies are not something new on top of everything else you're doing. It's about using our existing frameworks and ways of working with students to add value and to bring out these other outcomes through making. Let's move on to design thinking. And what is design thinking? When I ask people this question, the sorts of things that they tell me and talk about is that design thinking is a process. It's an intention. It's not just about making things, designing things. It's about following an intentional process to create something, and it's to create something that has a positive impact. So whether you're solving a problem, whether you're addressing a challenge, repairing something, finding a better way to do something, it's having that positive impact. But people also talk about design thinking being a mindset. It's that belief that we can actually solve a problem and improve things, having that creative confidence in my abilities to follow this process and to come up with a solution or a new way, improved way of doing things. And what I really like about design thinking is that it enables us to change the way we look at things. So we can transform a difficult situation, a challenge, a problem into an opportunity to come up with a solution. People also talk about design thinking being a very human-centered process. So it's humans solving problems for other humans or animals or groups of people or the environment, but it's humans helping others. People talk about it being a collaborative process. It's people working together, pulling their skills and resources to come up with the best possible solution. It's that optimistic belief that we can make a difference, and it's experimental, which I've mentioned in terms of maker pedagogy. that design thinking is not about getting things right the first time, but about having a go, coming up with a prototype and then testing it and tweaking it and so on. Then it's that mindset that we're continually improving, and if we keep doing that, we can come up with the best possible solution or outcome. At Makers Empire, we use the design thinking model from Stanford University. We've obviously done some design work to make this model appeal to our audience of primary and middle school students. And if you Google design thinking, you'll come up with a bunch of different models and frameworks. They're all pretty much the same thing, using different words and ideas. But basically, design thinking is a problem-solving methodology that enables us to find a problem, solve a problem, and test the solution once we come up with it. And we use the Stanford model because it's where the term and model was first developed. Design thinking was developed at Stanford University in the very late 1950s, believe it or not. And also it fits really well with the Australian curriculum, particularly with design and technologies.
Mandy, I've just got a question.
Sure.
Will we have access to some of these slides after?
I'm very, very happy to make the PowerPoint available. If I share that with you, Abigail, you'll be able to forward it to participants. Is that okay?
Yep, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so just a brief tour through design thinking, which has these, although it's not a linear process, you move back and forth and in a loop and so on as you need to, but it can help to understand it by looking at the phases. And design thinking model has these 5 phases of empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So in this empathize phase, this is about finding the problem by developing deep understandings and insights into the needs of others. So not just assuming that we know what other people or other groups of people need, but putting aside our own assumptions and doing lots of observations, interviews and so on, to really put ourselves in other shoes and find out what it is, how people experience a particular situation. Because when we're doing that, we're looking out for opportunities to improve things or to solve a problem. Tim Brown, who's the president of IDEO, and IDEO is an offshoot of the Stanford Design School. I love the way that he talks about empathy, because he talks about it being the building of bridges. So we build bridges through insight, which enable us to see the world through the eyes of others, understand the world through others' experiences, and I think most importantly, feel the world through the emotions of others. We then move on to define, which is about being really clear on the problem that we're wanting to solve. So once we've got those deep understandings into how others are experiencing a particular situation, we've got lots of information to use to help define the problem or help define an opportunity to design a solution. And in this phase, we're becoming really clear on what we want to achieve, and we're reframing what we've learned about a situation into an actionable problem statement. And this can often be a how might we statement. So we've been watching people struggle catching public transport, and we might come up with a how might we question. How might we make the train more accessible for people with vision, low vision or something like that. Define stage is really important, and when I do design thinking challenges with students and teachers, it's quite often tempting to rush this part because you want to get on and make stuff and come up with the solutions. But this part's really important because it's here where we become clear on our criteria for success. What is it that we are trying to achieve? And this part is crucial because once we've come up with a prototype or an idea, how are we going to test it if we don't know really clearly what we were trying to achieve with that? And Tim Brown again, he talks about the defined stage as being coming up with the right question. What are we trying to do here? Because there's nothing more frustrating than coming up with the right answer to the wrong question. So this phase is all about getting that question or that context clear and right. Then move on to the ideate phase of design thinking. Really, this is, to me, is the fun part, because this is where the creative thinking. Define is all about making that focused, convergent thinking, whereas ideate is about coming up with as many possible creative ideas as we can once we've got that clear understanding of the problem. And that creative thinking, the divergent thinking, comes in. So at this point, we're after as many possible ideas as we can come up with, removing those boundaries and constraints in thinking. And I'll just share one of my favourite strategies, which you may have tried before, for ideating ideas for solving problems. And it's called 100 Ideas in 10 Minutes, which is self-explanatory. But what you do, students are working in groups, they've got their well-defined problem, and they might have butcher's paper or a laptop or something. And the idea is that they need to come up with 100 ideas for solving that particular problem in 10 minutes. And there are some rules around this. Firstly, all ideas are recorded. So you've got a scribe or someone typing in the responses. So everyone's idea is recorded. You don't explain or justify your idea. This is collecting ideas, and you don't discuss or comment on other people's ideas yet. So this is the collection of ideas. But the purpose of saying 100 ideas in 10 minutes is you're trying to create this expectation that there's almost limitless ideas out there. You're not really expecting that the students are going to come up with 100 ideas, but you're trying to create this expectation that there is almost limitless. In fact, I say that, but somebody the other day told me that they tried this and they were thinking, oh, the students won't come up with 100 ideas, but I'll say that, and they came up with 214 ideas. So it's creating that kind of expectation. And the other reason for making it 10 minutes is giving the students a bit of time. And it's only a short time, but it feels like a really long time when the pressure's on to come up with a lot of ideas. And nearly every time I've run an activity like this with students and teachers, it's gone in a similar pattern, that the first 30 or so seconds is a real flurry of activity with lots of writing of ideas from all the group members. And then there's this awkward silence, and everyone's looking at each other like, there's still 9.5 minutes left and we're finished. And that's because they've written down the ideas they already had. But we want to start getting into those new ideas. And you might end up with your first idea, but you can also do that at the danger of missing a really, really good idea by jumping to your first one. So what usually happens after this sort of awkwardness, somebody contributes something different from left field, and that triggers someone else, and then you start to get those new and variety of ideas. Sometimes as the teacher you need to throw in some prompts like what's your craziest idea, or what might you do if you had all the money in the world or no money at all, and things like that. But that's the idea, is to generate as many possible ideas and to think creatively. We then select one of those ideas to develop as a prototype, and it's here where we start to have to analyse the ideas. So I usually ask the students, if say we're doing that 100 ideas in 10 minutes, to go back and now let's look at those ideas and rate them. So which ideas are likely to succeed, or so crazy they might just work, or that they really make us feel good and we want to try them. So starting to now evaluate those ideas and coming up with a way to test one of the ideas. So a prototype or a minimum viable product, MVP, something that's good enough to test. And this comes into that purpose. We're not just making things or designing things for the sake of it. We're creating something to meet a challenge or solve a problem. So we're needing, this prototype stage is making something good enough to test. We're not investing all our time and energy into making something that looks perfect, just good enough to test out the idea. And then we move to testing it. So we take our prototype, which could be a 3D model, it could be made out of junk materials, it could just be a diagram or an idea. And we test that, we get feedback, we take it back to the people that we're trying to help, and we use that information from the test to go back and refine. And we might have to keep doing that over several times until we get that the best possible product or solution. Stanford Design School tells us to prototype as if we know we're right, but test as if we know we're wrong. And this to me sums up design thinking, because it's having that creative confidence. We've gone through this ideate phase, we've got an idea that we're pretty happy with. So we're going to build a prototype confidently as if we know it's going to work. But when we test that thing, we're going to test it thoroughly, and we're going to actually be looking for things that are wrong with it or things that could be better, because that's our opportunity to improve the outcome, improve the solution. Empathise, define, ideate, prototype and test, and then repeat as needed. Okay, so design thinking in the curriculum, it's not surprising that we find design thinking very heavily in the technologies curriculum, particularly design and technologies. And one of the things that I really like about our Australian curriculum for tech is that it's a thinking-based curriculum. So it's all about creating solutions for a for preferred futures, but doing that through thinking processes, design thinking, computational thinking, and systems thinking. But we also see design thinking across the curriculum, and in particular, the general capabilities. And when you think about those capabilities being what the curriculum gives us to develop successful learners, confident and creative individuals, and active informed citizens, it's really interesting to see where design thinking fits in those. So I see design thinking a lot in critical and creative thinking, in ICT capability, but also things like ethical understanding. If I'm solving a problem for someone and I'm using a 3D printer, how am I being ethical about the use of plastic, for example? How am I working with people with disabilities in ethical ways, and so on? So I mentioned before that we use the Stanford model because it fits really well with the Australian curriculum. And when you look at the processes and production skills in our design and tech curriculum, you can see there's some different language used there, but it's very much this design thinking process. We investigate or build empathy and define the problem. We generate ideas and design prototypes. And then we actually produce and implement these solutions and prototypes. We evaluate, and then that collaboration and managing, so almost that project management, taking time idea from Papert's work. So I know that I've touched on a lot of ideas here and may have gone too quickly for people, but I wanted to give sort of a really broad, but I guess broad, but with the deeper ideas for what we do at Makers Empire, and what underpins that. Even though we are at our heart a 3D modelling software for primary and middle school students mostly, our big aim is not to produce great 3D designers. We're using our 3D modelling software to bring that maker-based learning into classrooms and to develop those design thinking skills that we think are crucial for developing problem solvers, independent, critical and creative thinkers, and citizens with empathy, really. So time flies when you're having fun, but I want to spend the last bit of time looking at some of the ways that Makers Empire can bring the maker-based pedagogies and design thinking into the classroom. And in particular, I want to share 3 of our ways of working: challenge courses, design missions, and managed projects. Our challenge courses are something we've started developing reasonably recently. And the idea of a challenge course, and I'll go into the app in a minute and show you what these look like, but a challenge course is a series of activities connected through a theme and aligned to curriculum. So we're producing constantly new offerings here. But things like Awesome Animals is about animal adaptations and biomimicry. We have sustainable communities and lots of different things like that. And we've also partnered with outside organisations like SA Water, the Construction Industry Training Board, to bring expert content into what we do. So I'm just going to hop into the app now and show you what I mean by a challenge course. So if you haven't seen Makers Empire lately, let's have a look. Sorry. On. Okay, that's what I was trying to do. So if you haven't seen Makers Empire lately, you can see that we've made a lot of changes in our offering. So you're still able to create anything you want in 3D for 3D printing or AR or other digital applications, but we also have a lot of inbuilt content now. So what I'm talking about with the challenge courses, if we go into Challenge Central, you can see that there's this suite of offerings, and what the student sees here depends on what their teacher has assigned them. So I have a bunch of different ones assigned to me here. If I go into Awesome Animals, what you can see here is that a challenge course made up of a series of activities. And those activities include videos. So I won't make you watch the whole thing, but just to give you the idea, we have a quick video about animal adaptation.
Living things have special features and behaviours that help survive in their environment. These are called adaptations.
Okay, so video content which enables us to bring in some ideas and information for students to think about. And then we have a quiz show. So with the quiz shows, our avatar is part of a game show. So the little froggy avatar there and our game show host. And we have some quizzes that are based on the content of that video. So what is an organism? A living thing, blah, blah, blah. A living thing. And as we work through the quiz, we're earning tokens, and tokens enable students to unlock different shapes and things, features in Makers Empire. And then we can work through that quiz. If I get something wrong, I'm able to go back and have another try. I might not earn as many tokens, but I am able to go back and have another think. And then the next activity type is what we call pro training. So through the video and the quiz, I've been thinking about different features that animals have that enable them to survive or adapt to particular environments. So one of the things we looked at in one of those videos is a polar bear's foot and how that helps the polar bear to survive in the snow. So we have a design tutorial where we're making a polar bear's foot, and this, I like to think of these as a bit like digital Lego. So I can make anything I want with Lego, but I can also follow the instructions in the kits that have the pictures and the step-by-step instructions using a certain amount of pieces. So that's what our pro training tutorials are like. So we follow along with this limited set of pieces and our instructions. The instructions are visual, verbal, text, and we can also use the little speaker there down at the bottom is a text-to-speech instruction, so you can have the instructions read to you as well. Okay, and then this will guide me through one way of making a polar bear's foot. And then the fourth activity type we have is an open-ended design challenge. So now that I've learned some information, engaged with some content, I've checked out my knowledge with the quiz, and I've learned some design skills. Now can I put that all together and work through this design challenge? So, for example, powerful predators, design an animal that can hunt or trap its prey. And so these are designed so students can work through them independently, but ideally they're a classroom focus where the teacher is introducing other activities as well and working through that design process. Let me just minimise that. And from a teacher point of view, in our dashboard, so what I was showing you just then was the Makers Empire app, what the students see, and what I have on my screen now is the teacher dashboard. So I talked about how teachers can assign these challenges to students through the dashboard, and then as students start to work on them, the teachers can monitor and look at how things are progressing for their whole class. So here's just an example of how this works. So this particular one is Oceans of Trash, and you can see here that Alfie got 5 out of 5 in that quiz and was 97% accurate with the design challenge. And when I click on each of these, I can see a bit more detail. So Delisha tried the quiz and got 2 out of 5, but then went back again and got 5 out of 5 and a bonus question correct. And also these are all green, but it's a traffic light system. So if somebody's a bit stuck and doesn't appear to be progressing through the activities, they might be orange, and if they're completely stuck, it's red. So at a glance you can see where everyone's up to and where you might need to help. Once the student has finished the challenge course, over on the right hand side there you can see the 3 dots. And you can go in there and send feedback. You can assess against curriculum. The student doesn't see the terms above and below and satisfactory, etc. But if you click on one of those, you can give the student some feedback and some tokens as a reward if you want. And you can also here download a report showing everything the student has done, that individual student has done in this challenge course, which can be used to share in a portfolio or assessment. And for each of these, you can click in and see a lot more detail. So you can see here that the design challenge for this oceans one was around creating something that could help either clean up the ocean or stop microplastics getting there in the first place. And you can see that Alfie has spent 9 minutes on this design and an effort score of 86. An effort score is an algorithm that's our best attempt at measuring the complexity of a design, because sometimes it's hard to see how much effort has gone into a design. So the effort score tells us not just time, but how many edits did the student make? Did they just plonk something down, or did they make multiple adjustments and movements to that? Anyway, I'm starting to deviate. So I just wanted to show you that we have this suite of challenge courses that bring making into an integrated teaching approach. So we're learning about oceans, we're learning about animal adaptation, so there's lots of science in there, but we're responding to that knowledge and showing what we know through making. So it's bringing making and constructing in a 3D way in an integrated approach into this other content. So while I'm here in the dashboard, another way that you can assign maker-based activities to students in Makers Empire is through our teacher missions. And teacher missions are one-off or singular design activities, whereas the challenge courses is that series of activities that might go over several lessons. So let's just say I want a student to respond to a class novel by making something. So this could be new setting. So the mission brief could be design a new setting that would, for characters, sorry, help if I could type. Design a new setting for characters in the novel. I can choose whether I want my students to use the Shaper module in Maker's Empire or the Blocker one, and then, which are two different ways of making in 3D in our app, and then I choose the class that I want to assign that to. So I'm assigning it to Demo Class 2, and then I launch the mission. Okay, I think, I'm not sure what happened there, but launch the mission. What's actually meant to happen then is that the student will get a notification when they log into the app telling them that their teacher has assigned that mission. So when I'm in my missions, okay, here are the missions here. I'm not sure what happened, what I did wrong with the character, the setting one, but I can see my different missions here. I can click on them and create whatever my teacher's asking me to do. And then my teacher, when I click finish, what am I meant to be making a coffee mug? When I click finish, the teacher will be able to see that in the dashboard. When I do the introduction to Maker's Empire in our next webinar, I'll go through more the nuts and bolts of using these tools. But just to give you an idea that is a way that you can bring in a making task into your teaching and learning. So whatever curriculum area or topic you're doing, you can assign a task or design task through Maker's Empire. And I'm aware of time, but I just also wanted to let you know that we've started running what we call our managed term projects. So these are available for free for schools that are already part of Maker's Empire, and for a small fee for schools that don't already have a Maker's Empire subscription. And what these are is a challenge course. So every term there's a different topic. We're just in the middle of our Oceans of Trash one at the moment. And next term, our theme is Make a Difference, which is about social enterprise and making things to help others, to raise money for charity and so on. And then in term 1 next year, we have natural disasters. So teachers from various schools will sign their classes up for this project, and you get a challenge course, like I just showed you before, the animals one. But then we also have a webinar to support you getting started, and then every week there is an email with some instructions on what to do next, and so you're supported through the whole process. And then at the end of the term, you're invited to submit some of your students' work, and we have an online showcase where students can see what other students have done in terms of that project. So those 3 things: challenge courses, design missions, and managed projects. If you're interested in signing up for maybe next term's managed project, go out of here. If you go to makersempire.com, and so to the Maker's Empire website, makersempire.com, and come along to the teachers, and then go to, where is Manage Pilot for School Groups. You can see information about those projects that I was just sharing with you, and then right down the bottom, Oh, actually, I'm very sorry. That's not right. I think my internet's being a bit silly.
It might be Teams. Teams does take a lot of resources.
Yeah, it's not Teams' fault that I clicked on the wrong link, but it might be Teams' fault that I can't go back. Anyway, how about I provide the correct link, Abigail, in a follow-up email, and that has a sign-up form there where you just put your email address and your school and so on, and you can be part of our term 4 or term 1 for next year managed program. Does that sound okay? All right, so I think we have gone over 5. Did anybody have any quick questions, Abigail, in the chat? Or
no one's written anything else while we've been listening this second half, but feel free to pop something in now or unmute yourself. I'm sure Mandy doesn't mind hanging around for another couple of minutes.
Definitely not.
But thank you so much, Mandy, for this session and to give us or for giving us that background behind why making is so powerful in terms of student learning and student outcomes. Just a quick plug, I think most people on here have already signed up, but if you haven't signed up for the next webinar that Mandy is running, that's on the 21st of September, and that's with a focus on the actual Makers Empire software. So if you did have questions, I think I've given you time to think of some. So feel free to type or unmute now.